Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Coffee Time Gyan. As you can see from this empty chair, somebody has forgotten to join us for today's shoot. Probably they've forgotten. We've intimated them in advance, but Mr. Aditya Paul is still yet to show up. But as you know, things go on. I wonder who that is. Could it be?
Holy shit, it's Tuesday?
You're so early. Welcome.
Oh, we have a shoot today, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Aditya here. Did you start without me?
Yeah, we started. So, welcome to Coffee Time Gyan. Let's get started. So, as I was saying, welcome to the next episode of Coffee Time Gyan. We are graced by the presence of His Highness Lord Aditya Paul. So, since you've come in late, why don't you introduce our viewers and listeners to the topics for this week's episode?
I'm not aware of it.
Very good.
Could you enlighten me?
So, for this week's episode, we're mostly speaking on two topics. The first being the US election, in which President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris won this year's US elections. And the second topic that we'll be speaking on is in relation to the Pfizer vaccine, which has now hit a lot of headlines in relation to the efficacy of the vaccine that they've achieved in the present clinical trials. So, without further ado, let's begin with the episode.
So Vivek, it's been hell of a week, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very momentous week this time.
Absolutely.
US elections just closed.
Yeah.
So I know you're a very pro-Trump supporter.
Oh, please. Do not say these things on camera. We're not doing cuts. You don't remember that.
So that's precisely why.
See, I'm not up for let's say categorizing myself as a Trump supporter.
But you like capitalism, and Trump is all about it.
Neo-capitalism. Let's draw the line there.
All right.
We want to help people and also grow rich. Let's keep it at that, right? Neo-capitalism.
Right. So Trump did not help out a lot of people, no? He promised a wall, did not build it.
Have you seen the wall that he built, right?
Yeah, I'm still...
And he said that it's like you cannot climb that, and people have. There are videos of people legit climbing that wall and crossing over. I don't know. He just, I think, spent billions of dollars onto nothing, I guess.
Did he?
Yeah.
At all spend billions? That's my question.
Huh?
Did he at all spend billions?
No. I will not insinuate anything on the camera which can, attract a legal lawsuit later on. And I would really hope that you don't do it as well. Can you not? It's without cuts, you remember?
You heard it, folks. Adi is saying that he won't perjure himself on camera. So with that, tell us about the elections.
Yeah, so
Without perjuring yourself on camera.
Okay, so that's a difficult task. So essentially, if you see, there has been a huge contrast and there are a lot of issues that have been addressed with the elections. Well, however, we, as far as what you have briefed me about, is that we'll be talking about one very specific topic, that is with regards to the counting, right? So how the counting is happening and how the judiciary is involved in the elections, or how they can be involved in the future, considering the conservative majority in the Supreme Court of the United States, right?
What are your thoughts on that?
So first of all, I think if you ask me, is like any sort of judicial activism which is overreaching will always be a problem. Because I believe like there's a reason why we have those independent wings, so that they can perform their essential tasks or purposes in that regards. However, I think with regards to other things, we have also seen the similar things with our country also, where suppose where judicial activism did overstep its boundary, right?
So let me stop you right there, since you're going on a very high level. So let me bring you to sub-ground level or ground level. Okay. Let's focus on Pennsylvania. So
Okay.
for our viewers and listeners, I'll just
Rather, let's
elaborate
just
on
not,
the Pennsylvania situation, but just
Let's actually consider all like 4-5 states or maybe around 6 states where
Agreed. So there are so for the viewers who are tuning in. So basically, in relation to this year's US elections, there were 4-5 different states, right? In the states of Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. There's also a couple of states like Alaska and New Orleans as well, where there's been some issues raised. When I say issues, I don't mean issues with the election. There have been issues ranging from missing ballots to ballots with defects that have been filed, and also things in relation to counting. For example, we are shooting this episode as on 9th November, and the counts for the state of Alaska has reached only, I believe, 50% of the total counts of the votes that have been put in. Right?
Yeah.
So
I think another thing that has come up is the in-mail thing. When you started with Pennsylvania, that's what I remember.
Mail-in votes.
Mail-in votes, yeah. I'm so sorry. Yeah, mail-in votes, right.
In-mail is something that is a mail that is distributed within a company or an organization.
Okay.
More you know. So yeah, moving forward, so what I was saying, so I would mostly want to focus on the state of Pennsylvania for only one reason. Primarily because prior to the election in September, the state of Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court rather, of the Pennsylvanian state passed a judgment in which, in consideration of COVID and all, they stated that although the end of ballot date, which is basically the last date for putting in your ballots, whether in person or through mail-in votes, was basically 3rd of November. Now, due to COVID, the ballots basically either came in late or, were basically filled in late. Correct? Due to which they reached after the 3rd November deadline.
Yeah.
Now, this state basically has a rule wherein all ballots which come in after the electoral date, which is 3rd November in this case, would not be counted.
Yeah.
Now, taking into account COVID, the court passed a ruling which essentially states that any ballots which come over mail that is stamped with a November 3rd date or earlier, but in this case focusing on November 3rd date, arriving till 6th of November 2020 would be taken into consideration for counting the ballots. Now, the Republican Party, so as you know, America follows a bipartisan system where they have two major political parties. One is the Republican Party, one is the Democratic Party. So Trump is the candidate for the Republican Party for this year's election, and Joe Biden is the candidate for the Democratic Party for this year's election. Right? Now, the problem with the state of Pennsylvania was that they made this order which basically allowed counting of ballots which arrived after 3rd of November till 6th November, but that was stamped that it was posted on 3rd of November, right? So that has been challenged by the Republican Party lawyers before the
US Supreme
Court, right? Basically the federal court, basically,
yeah.
Right? So those are still pending adjudication, if I'm not too wrong. But despite that, the state of Pennsylvania has gone in favor of Joe Biden, right? Which essentially was the turning point which allowed him to become president-elect.
So I think that's actually because the contested votes per se that are being, the votes that are being contested would essentially not make a difference.
Correct. So see, why it wouldn't make a difference is because essentially what the Republican Party lawyers have done is that they have stated that those votes should not be counted.
Yeah.
Now, if they lose, right, the votes get counted.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Right. In a state in which Biden has already got a lead, if not won. Correct. If they win, they do not get counted. In a state which Biden has again won. So it's a frivolous suit, but there is a very important point to it. The very important point in this is the court has basically opined that in relation to election law, right, wherein in the ordinary course of things in the United States, not only the state legislature but also the state Supreme Court, the governor also has power to modify and enact certain laws in relation to elections which may be beneficial for the voters. Correct?
Correct me again if I'm wrong, but so far what I have read about is basically that the word legislative and legislature is actually which is in question, and the conservative side of judges are actually saying that so that should be taken up basically in a literal sense.
Correct. Not only literal. So literal would literally, if you interpret the word legislature, that would essentially entail you considering the fact that it is a valid lawmaking process. Does not matter which wing it is coming out of. Be it the legislature, be it the the judiciary system or even the elected authorities from the state, right?
So we then face issues, I guess.
Yeah, so basically the issue that is there is the court has opined that it has gone through a more hyper-realistic interpretation of the word legislature, wherein they've said that no, only the state legislature has the power to amend or modify voting laws or electoral laws, basically, right? Now, where is the issue in this? The issue in this is, out of the 50 odd the states in the United States of America, there's basically majority of them are Republican states. Now, if the state legislatures are only allowed to rule on it, there's an issue. The issue, I'll put it to you in a very simple way, in the context of India, for example, and humor me on this, right? Because India does not have a very, apologies for the new sounds, it's a lift, somebody's going up and down, and no cuts, so yeah.
Also, on that note, can I get some water? Get me some water.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, coming back, so as I was mentioning, the putting it in more context of terms that you may understand, if we relate to India, for example, right? So humor me on this, because India does not have a federal system much like that of the United States, right?
Unitary bias.
Correct. So now, in the context of India, if we look at it, what happens is, let's consider a state, right? Each state is ruled by a one majority party, correct? Now that state's majority party essentially gets to decide on the legislature of that particular state.
Exactly.
Correct. In Bengal, for example, we have the Trinamool Congress. In Maharashtra, we have the Shiv Sena. In Delhi, we have the Aam Aadmi Party.
We have BJD in Orissa.
We have BJD in Orissa, right? So they get to decide on the people sitting in the legislature.
Exactly.
Now, if you give the legislature the ultimate control over all electorate laws, what happens is there is a indirect manipulation of the elections.
So we see problems, I guess, with regards to what we call gerrymandering.
Correct. There would be issues with gerrymandering. There would be mandates in relation to voter IDs for election.
Exactly.
For example, if you're an interstate migrant, they may not allow you to basically vote in a different state's election.
Exactly. Something I think which has come up in the state of Nevada, that there are around 1,200 votes that has been contested.
3,000 out-of-state voters. That's
so there are but I think Biden is at a 22,000 lead there.
It does not matter, but again, that does not matter. But again, at the same time, if the laws are made in such a way that it favors the Republican Party, right?
Exactly.
This will essentially defeat the purpose of having a bipartisan election system, because essentially you're favoring one party by all different means and measures, right? So yeah, you can just live. So what's your thoughts on that?
So essentially what I think, before we go into that, let's explain the audience as to what gerrymandering is and how it can really affect an election. So essentially
Give us a very simple picture.
Okay,
because I know you.
I'll try my best. So trying to explain it to a 5-year-old, as you would say, it would be. So we have, say, 2 colonies, and say they are voting for any position. There's a position open for, say, a colony president or something of that sort, and they're going to vote. Now, if you segregate the voters in such a way that you make vote banks out of it, essentially. So, in India, it is happening in the form of vote banks, where we see vote bank politics, be it Muslim vote banks, Hindu vote banks, this, that, a lot of fault lines that are being, egged on to win elections, essentially. And it's a similar pattern that we see even with the US election. If you're trying to essentially say, we know that there is a portion of people which is within the state of Nevada, and it is, say, sort of Republican, and considering that in Nevada, say, I know that I will, being a Democrat, I am going to win, and being a Republican, I'm not going to win. The picture is very clear to me. Then I can try and get that into a separate state which is Democratic heavy. So that way, what happens that they get more votes in the other, and that essentially is not illegal, it's on a very grey area. It's a very shady area that way. So as to deciding what the geographical areas are with regards to who can vote in those geographical areas based on statistics, basically.
That's essentially my point. So that would defeat having more than one party. So essentially you're manipulating geographical boundaries, laws to benefit your party.
Exactly.
This is the Republican Party. But having said that, this year's election was a nice win, I would say. I won't say it was a massive win, it was very close, right?
Yeah.
Much like the 2000 election between George Bush and Al Gore.
So similar problems did come up during the 2000 election, if we like, with regards to the Florida state, I guess.
Right.
That
2000.
Yeah. So in the year 2000, if I may, as much as I remember, is like it was Al Gore and
Al Gore
George
and
Bush.
George Bush. George Bush was won by a very small
margin, and that happened because of the Florida votes being recounted or something of that sort.
So that's what I was saying. So in this context, although this year's election's been settled and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has been chosen as the president and the vice president elect, this change in the law in relation to the legislature, right? This hyper realistic interpretation of the word legislature, I personally feel, and I know, not only hope, I know you'll agree with me, will cause a lot of problems in relation to US elections in the near future.
Exactly. So that is what we are having. So it was a very smart move, I guess, from the Republican Party that right before the elections they did appoint. There were a lot of new appointments into the Supreme Court in the last 2 years, I would say. Yeah. And that is a very... politically, it's a smart move, but of course, like, I don't think that is... that hurts democracy deeply, I believe.
But because, let's see, which direction things...
That is the entire thing. Like, right now, Mr. Biden will have a huge onus on himself to save a democracy, I believe. Because for the last 5 years, America hasn't really enjoyed that entire... so...
Let's see.
They haven't really enjoyed...
It's a new term for Biden. Probably next week he's going to announce a new task force for COVID. Let's see. Not probably, it will be a better situation than with Trump, but let's see.
I'm hoping we'll not have meme wars as much.
Let's see.
Yeah.
So moving on to essentially our next segment, which we wanted to talk about, and this is more of a follow-up to a previous episode, where you and I talked about the COVID vaccines and the situation. So as of shooting this today on 9 November, so we have a new vaccine or a new development in the existing vaccine. So this drug company, Pfizer, right? So this was, I don't know why the name Pfizer sounds so funny.
No, it's not. It just reminds me of the 7,000. I'm just insensitive, right? Pfizer. So the thing that is there with Pfizer, the new development, and everybody should know of this, is Pfizer has made an announcement today on 9th November wherein they have stated that the vaccine that they were working on has proved to be a little more than 90% effective in its phase 3 clinical trials, right? So now they are rounding it up to 90% overall, but they've stated that had the trials, or rather if they continue with the trials further, they'll reach a more than 90% efficacy of the vaccine. So now, that solves one of the issues that we brought up last time. That they have solved that part where even without long-term per se trials, they have achieved that level of efficacy.
No. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So see, recounting the words of Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I love him that.
Yeah. So he stated, it's not the objective to have the first vaccine, it is the objective to have the most effective vaccine. Pfizer has achieved the most effective vaccine. But coming to your point again, the Pfizer vaccine is a mRNA vaccine.
Yeah.
mRNA vaccines are a very new age technology, right? So we, again, coming to your point from last episode, we do not have sufficient data.
Infrastructure.
Not only infrastructure, we do not have sufficient data to predict the long-term effects of this vaccine.
Absolutely.
Right? In initial clinical trials.
So that is something that is still in question, right?
Correct.
Okay.
In initial clinical trials, Pfizer has done with, I believe, 94 odd COVID positive patients, and in phase 3, they've considered 164 test subjects, right, for the vaccine. Now, they've achieved these results in a clinical setting, right? Now, you see, clinical setting is one thing, out and about in the real world, right? Of different climates, of different kinds of people, of their race, ethnicity, gender.
The kind of medications they are taking.
Correct.
It might be very varied medications, so they have to understand it might create complications, say some sort of a diabetic patient.
Correct.
It might have those effects.
Correct. So see, they may have taken those factors into account, they might not have, considering the present time crunch situations, right? And I was also reading up that they've stated that this vaccine is going to be primarily for those who've not had COVID yet.
Yeah.
Right? Another challenge to this, and this is more from the Indian scenario, which is essentially this mRNA vaccine is required to be maintained in a cold chain of minus 80 to minus 90 degrees.
There, we are not going to get cured. Indians, we are done.
So
We're going to
India,
probably die of this disease or something.
so India again,
We do not have the infrastructure. That is something I've
correct.
harped upon. I
India
cannot harp
does
upon
not
it anymore.
have the necessary infrastructure to maintain a cold chain of minus 80 to minus 90. Correct? So this I was reading up, I believe a few weeks back, the chairman or the MD of Biocon was mentioning that India doesn't have the infrastructure, right, to maintain this temperature in the cold chain for a long period.
However, on that note, I read up on a very interesting piece of news that
Yeah, you were telling me about that. Yeah.
IISc is coming up. And there's a startup there, a Bangalore-based startup, which is Indian Institute of... please help me out here. IISc Bangalore. Was it Satyajit there? Yeah. Anyway.
So IISc Bangalore.
Yeah, so IISc Bangalore, there's a startup there who have come up with this sort of a vaccine which would actually be viable for India because it can be stored at around 30 to 40 degrees, I think 30 degrees Celsius. So that is now still again we have all those phases left, we have a long time to achieve that. So for now the only hope that we see is like this vaccine which is ensuring or per se guaranteeing that yes, we are 90% sure that this is going to work. However, I believe that another problem that we mentioned previously is with regards to prices, is regards to how governments are going to get get this technology or this sort of a vaccine.
The ball has already started rolling in that angle because the CEO of Pfizer was mentioning that, they are not in a position to mention who would be getting the vaccines first, right?
The highest bid.
But again, India, I believe, I was reading this article a few days back where it was mentioning that for people to get a vaccine, they would have to produce their ID card, right? To ensure that the vaccine dosage or the vaccine subjects are in more controlled and they know who's received the vaccine, who hasn't. Probably it's going to be some Aadhaar authentication, which
It's
is
like NRC all over again.
probably, and it raises a point of anonymity and privacy of medical data and whatnot, right?
Exactly.
So that is something we'll be covering in our next episode.
That's with also regards to the elections. I think we forgot to mention.
Yeah, voter manipulation and
anonymity is a huge problem that has been raised even with the election.
Right.
We will definitely cover
We'll pick it up in our next episode. But for this one, what I wanted to mention is, so see, movement is there. Although grassroots movements is there to acquire the vaccine and give it to the necessary people, and now Pfizer has come up with their own, let's say, effective vaccine, right? But again, considering your point, and I believe you were mentioning to me about something, Pfizer's cancer vaccine, which was sold at a huge
cure. Yeah, like 7,000 times price hike was like they were selling at 7,000 times the cost price of that particular product.
Right.
Now, that is the thing, like if something of this sort, like the vaccine, is in the hands of crony capitalists, it's going to be a huge problem because something that you harped upon last time is that subsidies, people will have a problem affording the vaccine in India, that's for sure. And now if Pfizer decides that no, I'm going to sell the vaccine at a very marked up, hyped up price because I can, it's going to be a huge problem because I don't know how much Indian government would be able to actually subsidize on those prices. So yeah.
So in closing, essentially, I will reiterate my previous point once again. Governments need to step in. They need to ensure they take an approach where the vaccines reach the masses, because Pfizer has predicted that around the end of 2021, around 1.3 or 1.4 billion doses would be manufactured. And out of which, essentially, if I'm not wrong, 2 doses need to be taken with a 21-day gap in between the both of them, right? So if I account for 1.4 billion doses, for example, that's only 700 million people getting the vaccine out of a world population of around 9 billion, if I'm not wrong, wherever we are nearing.
No, we're not there yet. Not 9 billion.
So let's say
somewhere around 7 billion.
7 billion, right? That's 10% of the entire world population getting the vaccine by next year's end. and that too for those countries which support a 80 to 90 degree
minus 80
rather,
to 90, like
code change.
So it's essentially like the rich is gonna survive.
So essentially, my point again is governments need to step in. They need to figure out whether be it through compulsory licensing, subsidies, free distribution, get the vaccine out to the masses, get more manufacturers involved for this vaccine, right? If possible, locally in India, since it has such a high efficacy, and help out the common good of humanity, let's say, in the long
Yeah, so that is what really started new capitalism. Like the government should actually look into that and make sure that Pfizer or any other company which is actually coming up with such effective vaccines should have a part of it being completely delivered at a very convenient rate or at a very convenient manner for that matter.
So essentially, neo-Trump supporter supports the pros but disagrees with the cons. If he says no to this, he's a Trump supporter.
No, I'm not.
With that, thank you for joining.
I don't grab anything. Trust me. Only thing I grab is a cup of coffee.
He says it. You believe it or not, it's up to you.
I'm grabbing it right now.
Thanks for joining.
So we hope you liked our recent episode that we have come up with, and we hope that you're liking the content. Please do give your feedbacks, comment, like, share if you like it, and Vivek wants to perhaps insinuate something which I'm not getting.
Thanks for joining.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
definitely. Thanks for joining us.